Hello, my name is Deirdre Coyne, and thank you for joining us today. I am delighted to be joined today by Hillu Littlehales, who is a former executive coach and a ghostwriter, which I am absolutely fascinated and thrilled to be able to talk about today. So, welcome, Hillu.
Welcome to you as well. Thank you. You can see I'm really excited and a bit nervous as well. So I'm really glad to be on this and curious what's going to happen.
Yeah, and for me too, I'm a little bit nervous because this is the first time I've actually done an interview. So we've done the podcast, I've done my lives that I do daily, but this is the first time that I've had an interview. So we're in this together, but I guess everybody who is watching or listening is here to hear all about the wonderful things that you do. We are both from different areas coming together, but primarily we're talking about mindset, mental health, and how we can work and perhaps offer some advice and strategies about how we can all improve our mental health. So tell me a little bit about your journey, Hillu, and the corporate career that you had for many years, and how now, and also the journalism, the ghostwriting, the writing. Tell me everything.
Yes, well, I'll try to keep it short. Otherwise, we'll have to do 3 podcasts. It does sound a little bit like a break in a career to say I used to be an executive coach and now she's a ghostwriter. But for me, it's not. And that has to do with the fact that I always wanted to be an author, a writer. Mm-hmm. I've always loved to write as long as I can think back, also at school. So for me, it was natural that I would eventually go down that road. So I studied literature, and I started out in my work life as a journalist for one of the largest daily newspapers in Germany. I did that for 8 years, but it is a job that back then nobody talked about mental health.
Okay.
But it is a fact that at some point I realized there are actually no old journalists on the level that I was working with at that time in a big newspaper. I would know about freelance, but in the offices, it's mainly younger ones. And then you have a few old and gray ones up the hierarchy, which is not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be that kind of journalist that still goes out and writes stories. And they couldn't possibly all have a career. So even back then, I realized most of my colleagues needed that glass or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of wine in the evening to calm down, to tune down. And there was a lot of medication going on. And now in hindsight, I see that more clearly. But back then it was just, I don't want to end like them. Most of my colleagues and other people in that industry had one kind or another of issues, health issues, and mental health issues. And some of them so extreme that, one colleague we discovered one day, he was actually sleeping in the dark room in the editorial office because he had lost his apartment at home. So that had been going on for months and nobody had realized that he had lost his home. So long story short, I went corporate. I found a job in a really good company with a focus on corporate communications, internal communications, which led to me working on projects that had to do with mergers and acquisitions. It was a really big German corporation that bought on average 18 to 23, that's their numbers, not mine, companies per year, small ones that just fit into what each business division was doing. But their big strength was change. It is a big, old, really old company, and more than 120 years old now, in an industry that has been around for long. But they managed to somehow go with the flow and develop overall the decades and stay on top because they were really successful in integrating new companies they were buying. And I became part of that machinery almost because it was so deeply ingrained in their organization that whatever they did, they would always have somebody to help with the integration of the new teams. And that was mainly communication based. We used to say conflict starts with a C, like communication, for a reason. So whenever somebody, and a communicational expert was called in, was not because we were so good at writing posters. It was because we helped either avoid conflict, to escalate, or even develop in the first place, or to resolve conflict that came from the different narratives and the different organizational parts that were growing together. Companies are not driven by key figures. They're driven by people believing in something, a story that the company stands for. People don't quit a job because of the income. Most of the time they don't. They leave people. And they leave people because they no longer find the story there, the narrative that they believe in. The mission is not something the company puts as posters on a wall. It's very people-driven. And if those people don't talk the same language, and I'm not talking about English or French, I'm really talking about what am I hearing, what message am I getting? And if that's not there anymore, I don't find myself in there anymore, and then I move on. And in acquisition, it's important to keep most of the people, really, because you need to keep the organizational structures intact to be able to continue doing your work. But you also need the key players, those who tell the story that the rest of the organization believes in. So that was my role. So while I was still doing group coaching in that sense, being in charge of post-merge integration projects internationally, also in Asia Pacific, in China for many years, it was mainly the communication part that was driving me. And then for about 11 years, I went abroad as an expatriate to China. First only China, but later on all of Asia Pacific, including India and Japan and Korea, which was an absolutely fascinating time, but always with a focus on organizational development, growing either new plants, not as in green, but as in factories, in organizational structures, and helping the leaders and the executives in those new organizations becoming part of the bigger family, part of the story that this company was telling, that this company stood for. And they were really successful.
Yes. So throughout both of those times, you were leading the communication through change, and all of those companies that merged and all those acquisitions. I imagine for the people and the mental health experience of that, the communication piece was key to that.
Yes, absolutely. And when we talk about management, it's not a box of balls that all look the same. It's all people. It's individuals with individual aspirations. And especially in the international context, most of that is driven by expatriates. So that these are people, specialists, who are working in another country for a certain period of time. And it sounds like a great experience, and it is. I was one myself, and I would not want to give it up. So if I had to restart my life, I would like to do this part definitely again. But it also means that you lose your home ground, the things you don't see that you actually have. The getting up in the morning, all the things you do when you get up in the morning, not even thinking yet, pour yourself your cup of coffee, you look out the window, there's things that give you safety, that give you the sense of home. You will have, the company takes care of everything. You will have an apartment, you might even have a driver. So on the outside, it looks like you don't have a worry at all in the world, but the safety net that your soul needs is gone. And so a lot of the individual coaching that came up in those days originally was just me being part of the post-merger project. But out of that, more and more I was doing individual coaching for senior executives. And also there, I was usually called in for communication topics, intercultural coaching, helping executives to work with their mainly local teams better. But most of the time I would say it was hardly ever an intercultural topic. It was never the fact that, say, a German manager worked with a Chinese team. It was never the German-Chinese thing. It was always a personal aspect that became visible on the outside. And so the longer we worked, the more I worked with the senior managers and all the way to top executive level. More than 90% of them said their biggest problem really was lack of sleep, mental health issues. And on that level, not being able to talk about it, or having the feeling not being able to talk about it. Very often their families were left behind because they had small kids. They stayed back in the country. After all, you're only going for a year or two, sometimes 3. So they didn't want to have their kids going, taken out of school, taken out of their environment. Those who brought the families along projected their own sense of not being good enough, of being found out. Very often that was the topic there, like, what am I doing here? I'm not, I've been promoted to a position that mentally I wasn't prepared for. I'm getting the income, I have the title, I've got a beautiful office, I'm being treated like royalty in these positions, even have a driver. But one day I'm going to be found out, and what on earth have I done to my family if they brought them along? So drag them out of the circle of friends. The kids very often found it easier to come to terms. They learn the language very quickly. The managers didn't have the time for language lessons very often. They tried, but they didn't have the mental capacity nor the real time in the beginning. And that isolates you even more. That restricts you to the expatriate community, and you don't really start interacting with your environment, which is another problem for the mental health issue. So it was that part of daily life that was breaking away. The stability you have from a home life that has grown, things you do at home which you couldn't do there. In the beginning, when I was there, you couldn't buy coffee. It simply didn't exist in that part of China where we were living. And that might be a small thing, but somebody like me, first thing I do in the morning is get myself my cup of coffee. Don't talk to me before that. I'm a monster. So all these small things came together, and then on top you have the responsibility for a whole organization in a country, in a culture you don't understand. You have your own family. You have the sense of duty and responsibility for the people you are the manager of, and constantly asking yourself, am I really, a lot of them really had that feeling, I'm going to be found out.
That impostor syndrome. Yeah.
Imposter syndrome.
And how do
so
you...
what if that happens? What happens to the people I'm responsible for?
Yeah. And how do you then, as a coach, or even if somebody is in those scenarios now, what would your advice be, or how do you manage that?
I sort of, almost by coincidence, with the first, not cases, but people I really worked with, discovered that working on the storytelling aspect, the internal storytelling aspect, was helpful. So that's where the sort of loop closed again. I had been trained and qualified as a systemic coach, because that's how you build organizations. And my job title was Organizational Development Director. So from that point of view, looking at the organizational side of things and structure side of things, focused and forced my clients to focus on the problems. And I had one client that I originally didn't really want to take on, because it was something that I felt very far outside my own comfort zone. But his manager had said the person in question didn't feel comfortable talking with somebody outside the company. So he wanted a coach from within the company that he could talk about company internals with, which would not have been possible with an external. Even with a non-disclosure agreement, he would not have felt comfortable. And he was working in sales and marketing, very advanced knowledge of products that nobody else knew about. So he just felt more comfortable talking with somebody inside. And he had anger issues, to the point that he would smash office equipment in a fit, take the mouse and smash it against the wall, take his monitor and swipe it off the desk. When he got mad with employees, not by himself, he would do that in the office with everybody else watching, or even when talking with a specific person. But he was also brilliant from the job content point of view. But it had reached a point where people started threatening to leave if that continued. He never attacked a person, but he would get these massive fits and people were just scared of walking into his office. And he didn't want to be like that either. But that, of course, is an area where I say he probably needs a therapist. And that's why I said, well, I don't think I'm the right person to help in that context. And that's where, when I started on the first coaching session, almost by coincidence, asked him to describe, talk about what the story is that's going on right now, how he sees himself, his role, independent from anything else going on. So focusing on the inner narrative, what's driving, what does he feel, what thoughts are coming up before he's getting these fits. And I'm not a therapist, and I told everybody I can't do therapy. So if I get to a point where I see this is getting too dangerous for him, I would really step out and encourage to have a professional step in. But with talking about the inner narratives that drove him, what he saw, as what he thought his role, his hero thing was, and almost going into it like a story unfolding, an adventure story unfolding. And us talking about, the miracle, asking the miracle question, as in, if you now came home today and somebody had waved a magic wand and all of these problems would be away, how would you describe it? Talking about alternative endings. What if we turn that into science fiction? What if we turn that? So that was coming from the newspaper background. You do have a news article where who does what, when, and why is the shortest form of a newspaper article. But then you have features, and you have interviews, and you have like pieces where you go deep in depth, like a documentary, but where you decide what part of the story you want to you put a light on. So you could make any hero today look really bad, and you could make any drug lord look good, depending on what kind of details from his backstory you focus on in your story. So I played that with him, and like, okay, if we had that. Back then, I wasn't really so deep into writing books yet, but of course, with many years of newspaper background, looking into, we start with the what and when and why, and now we try to make a feature, and now we try to make that feature for a specific target audience, and what would that look like, and what parts of that would you pick? And it was experimental, and I told him before that this might not make it better, but that's the only way I can actually work with him, and that's why we discovered just becoming aware of the internal voices and the stories that are driving his behavior made it already better. And then we started working with a team after a while, and had sessions where we had the team work out their expectations, their fears, their likes and dislikes, and him doing the same. And then allowing the team members to ask him questions anonymously. And he could always turn out as answering a certain question if that felt too personal. But that was where the first time they actually talked about the fact that he had fears as well, where he could come open and say, I'm not sure if I'm the one, too much responsibility, not feeling good enough. Nobody had actually ever told him how brilliant he was. They told me they want to keep him because he's so brilliant, but he never got that feedback from anybody. And why? So it's that, what stories do others tell about him, and what story does he hear? So it was all about the communication, the background, the narratives that were in place. And today, yes, we would call it that, but that was many years ago. We didn't have the right terms, but that led to him never having an angry fit anymore, because he knew he could actually tell his team, I don't know. What can we do to find it out? And before that, he thought, everybody's expecting me to always have the right answer. And because we're in China, people in China need clear guidance. That was the narrative he was sent to China with. Chinese employees need clear guidance. They need you to tell them everything they have to do. Otherwise, they're not going to do anything. They're going to wait for you to tell them what to do. And that's true.
And you would describe yourself as our inner critics. You described before the inner critic, and yes, how you, for somebody who's working with you, that you're their own inner critic's worst nightmare.
Yes. Yeah, that came out of it. Once after I worked with that particular client, and again, I'm not a therapist. I didn't have any background in that. I had some initial exposure to positive psychology, which I loved a lot, and I had done a class on Coursera online just to learn about positive psychology. But my practical training, my actual accreditation was not within positive psychology then. But I did realize that the outside situation very often is much more lighthearted, much less expectation, much less pressure than what most of the people I worked with felt and experienced. And I remember that one sentence from when I learned coaching was, you don't see what you don't know that you don't see. So there's becoming aware of this inner critic of that voice, and becoming aware it's just one voice. It's not truth. It's not the reality. It's somebody from your past, an experience from your past telling you that, and giving it a role in a story. That's how it all evolved eventually. And that became really, really powerful and helped me. Yeah. I mean, I've been diagnosed with ADHD very late in life, only 2 years ago. And I've always, all my life, been struggling with imposter syndrome, with not being good enough, wondering why would somebody pay me to live in China to do this great job. I was the first one to say, I don't belong here, I can't do this. And having to pretend as if. So while working with my clients, I learned 10 times more about myself, and started applying it by journaling in a specific way, by writing it down, by sort of going on a hero's journey with myself, pen to paper. And that was the next step, where I said, a lot of people find it really hard to talk about their inner worlds, but find it easier to write about it. So I developed an approach where we would have micro sessions, and I would ask them to write about some of these things we talked about until we meet again. And that turned out to be a big turning point. So for me, I did classic coaching as well, because that was my job. That's what I was paid for. But the big moments that I look back came from that combination of writing and storytelling, really, and identifying narratives in that story that would not find a place, and should not be in the story as a whole.
And a couple of things. So I think it's worth repeating, you don't see what you don't know that you don't see. And when and how we met through the Andy Ramage and the Aratewe, and we both had the joy of undertaking positive psychology training. And that for you, combining your previous experience and talking about, getting people talking about their own inner critic, their own, explaining their own hero's journey, has then, I can see, led you to the part of the work that you do now. I know you still are an executive coach. You still work with high performing and coaching, but also ghostwriting. So helping people who've been through the experiences like that client that you spoke about, and been in those corporate environments or different environments, and the effect on mental health, and how you do that today. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
That's where the break sort of came in. I have to say that I did not plan to become a ghostwriter in the first place. It's like so many stories had to do with COVID. I had, after many years working abroad, decided I want to be my own boss. I want to have my own coaching business with my partner at that time. He had been a coach for 20 years. And I had really got deeply immersed in positive psychology. So I was working on an approach using my experience, especially with, there is somebody selling narrative coaching out there. So I'm not that person, but I worked with narratives in coaching and found that very helpful. So I wanted to continue doing that, but combine it with positive psychology, which I found was a really good way to do it. And I was all fire and yes, I'm going to do that. And that was at the end of 2019. So I had quit my job in September 19, gave myself 3 months to, get started. I had the first clients, of course, from my old network, contacting some people. And then COVID-19 struck. And not only in the sense that where I was living at that time, which was in Austria, they reacted very quickly with lockdowns, and most of my clients said, well, we have to wait what's happening there, postponing the projects until later in the year first, and later canceling it altogether. But also my partner at that time died within the first weeks of COVID while on a business trip, while on the phone with me. Okay. And that was, it's not like that image, somebody pulls the rug out from under you. It really felt like that. So I lost all energy, all drive. I had quit my old job. There was no way back into that because of COVID. I could have probably gone back if it hadn't been for that, but they were downsizing left, right, and center, sending everybody to work from home office. So the kind of work I did wouldn't have been needed anyway. So it's I was there with no financial perspective, a mortgage to pay off. My partner had just died under circumstances that I found very hard to come to terms with. And then it sounds easy, but then I basically just used my own principles on myself and did massive journaling and wrote a book. And in that time, I needed an income. Coaching, online coaching was one thing, and I found a few clients that way, but it didn't give enough to be able to keep paying my mortgage. So it was by pure coincidence that a male nurse from the US, was writing a book about mental health during COVID and experiences in that, and asked me to ghostwrite it. So he contributed the stories, and I wrote the text as a ghostwriter. And I have to say, it was just going through that. The topic was grief, because he had so many people being, old people dying in hospital alone, and the relatives not being able to get to them. A lot of these things going on. That helped me so much, just writing about his take on how to deal with grief, his stories, but bring that together in a book about.
It must have been incredibly difficult for you, considering you were going through grief at that time yourself.
Yes, but I think if somebody had asked me to write a business book, I couldn't have done it. But the fact that this was about grief, and that was about, I mean, I had grief in two ways. I had lost a career that I had actually enjoyed, and I thought it would, me starting my own business would be a new step in that career. And then everything changed. I mean, the whole world sort of changed. I couldn't just go next door to my friends and have a rant, because that was lockdown. In Austria meant lockdown. You were supposed to stay inside. Mm-hmm. And so I was living in a small village, all on my own. And yes, I had Zoom and stuff and contact to, the group of people that we were both in, and then also studying to be a positive psychology coach. But that I didn't have the energy in those days to actually really do something about it. But finding that, I went on an online platform before my partner had died, which is where freelancers can get consulting and coaching jobs. And that's where this came in, but as a ghostwriting job. And out of I saw it come up, I read the word grief, I read the word writing, and I thought, okay, that's something I can do. And that was probably the one thing that saved me, to be very honest. Working through the research on grief really helped me work through my own phases of grief. And of course, it became a very personal project at the end of the day, which is probably the best book I've ever written for somebody else, though. But I learned three things during that time. There are a lot of people out there who have really important stories to tell, but might just be lacking a skill that I have, which is turn them into words on paper. Doing that is highly therapeutical for the author, the person who sort of comes up with the input for me as well, doing the writing, but it does something good to people who might be going through similar experiences. So that's sort of how I found my field. Also with the memory of 90% of the managers I worked with, they didn't need coaching in how to be a better time manager. They didn't need coaching how to talk to their employees. In 90% of the cases, it was about inside things. It was about their own mental health that kept them from sleeping. Almost everybody said, I don't sleep anymore, and that's a big problem. So now I married a sleep coach in the meantime, but back then I didn't really know much about sleep, but I knew a lot of things that have impact on lack of sleep, and I could help them with. So basically it was my early endeavor, my early ways into the sleep world that I might have exaggerated it a bit by moving to the UK and marry a sleep coach, but it sort of has been part of that journey as well. So when I got married and I moved to the UK, then again, I had to basically restart a career. And since I love writing so much, and with that initial really good experience, and the second one followed with the same client, I thought, okay, there's something I really like to do. And that's what they tell you. If you do something you really like and you're really good at, and there's a need, you probably have found the perfect job for yourself. Yeah. And so I have found a place where all that comes together. So I'm not doing ghostwriting for the fiction stuff. So for me, it's nonfiction. I'm working with people who have a story to tell, in the sense of they've gone through a difficult time, they found a way to come through it, and they would like to share that with the world. And most of that is about mental health. And they write about that because they've experienced it themselves. So it's very personal. They don't write these books to become as a get-rich-quick scheme. You find that out there as well. Somebody obviously at some point started, write an ebook on KDP on Amazon, and you'll be rich and famous in no time. So I get contacted by these people as well, but that's not what I do. So it's very often even senior executives talking about mental health issues. It's doctors. I had 2 doctors contacting me about things they observed in 30 years of practice. And so, like I had observed in working with senior executives, that it's the lack of sleep and the feeling of not being good enough for the people they're responsible for, not just those in their teams, but their families as well. Will the decisions they make impact them? Yes, they will. And how do they deal with it? How to deal with the sense of responsibility and the sense of for their people, and the sense of responsibility for the company they represent, which not always goes hand in hand. And there was a pattern that I saw when working with the executives, but the same thing happens to these doctors. They've seen a certain pattern in their patients, and they write about it. And it's a very rewarding kind of work, because you're becoming part of a journey that helps other people. And I love that. And then almost also by coincidence, the whole coaching thing came back into it. Because very often working on the book and the 2 of us working together, and not always do I do the full ghostwriting. Sometimes they want to do the writing, and I'm just a writing coach and help them bring their voice to paper and finish a book, because they might be good doctors, but not necessarily a good author. But I'm also helping them sometimes with coaching sessions when they see, well, some of the stuff they actually went through is not completely resolved, and they would like to continue working on it with the help of a positive psychology coach. So that's why I still have both as a service. Mainly it is ghostwriting, but there's a lot of coaching coming out of it. In the meantime, also particularly with people from the creative world who are suffering from a lot of, imposter syndrome, not being writer enough, mental blocks that result in not being able to write, writer's block, which is never a creative thing. It's very often that inner voice, that inner critic and perfectionism that's behind it. And with a background in executive coaching, I can help there, because an executive can say, I have work block today, I can't go to the office. Or I have budget block today, I can work on my figures. So the tools that work with them work in the creative context as well. So that's a little bit more coming in from that part of the industry as well.
Just what you do and the experience that you've had and what you've shared is, I suppose, the word that, apart from amazing and just so needed, it reminds me of that, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right, the ikigai, you know, the finding, helping somebody to find their life's purpose. And that purpose is something that the world needs. It's something that, can't remember all the quadrants, but that's exactly, for me, what you've described that you help with.
Yeah, it's true. I'm a big believer in the blue zones.
Yes.
You know, the 5 areas in the world where many more people per, like 100,000 people can turn 100 in a healthy way. So they're still fit, they're mentally still there, they're happy. So that it's healthy aging, basically. And being 56 myself, and sort of having moved to a completely new country and starting all over again at the age of 54, there was that nagging voice in there as well, like, oh my God, what are you doing? And a bit of fear involved, of course, as well. So I found them, and Ikigai is one thing, the Goai is another. So the Japanese philosophy of finding the thing that drives you is much more important than looking for a career that might look successful for other people. And while being an executive coach for a big corporation with an expatriate contract, and I had beautiful corner office and great Audi as a company car, I feel more successful now. And it's absolutely true. If you do what you love, you don't have a day of work in your life anymore. I told you at the running up to this that I'm actually annoyed if I have to interrupt what I'm doing because I have to eat something or drink something. Now, my partner is coach as well. So we're both working away on our respective jobs, but we very much enjoy talking about our experiences, learning from each other. We're very outdoorsy people. We have an old Land Rover and love taking it on adventures across the United Kingdom. So we have that balance of not getting lost in our work too much. Plus, with his 35 years experience in coaching, he knows exactly when to, hit the alarm clock and say, it's enough now, we should take a break. And but if he weren't there, I probably would work 24 hours a day. And not because I'm a workaholic, but I really enjoy it. It doesn't feel like work at all.
And that's what they say, don't they? That if you find what you love, you won't work another day in your life. I do have a question for you, because you had said to me when we were talking previously that as a little girl, you were asked, what do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up? Can you repeat that story?
Yes, it's like everybody at school, there's always that question, what would you like to be when you're an adult? And most people say a doctor or a train driver or a pilot. And I said Astrid Lindgren. It's not everybody knows her anymore, but when I grew up, she was the biggest name in children's literature. Pippi Longstocking, a lot of other books, especially probably in the German-speaking world, but I've read that she's like globally been a massive success, and her books have been turned into films as well. In today's world, she might not be 100% politically correct. Certainly in those days, you would be writing about bad guys with words and terms that we wouldn't use today anymore. She talks about gypsies that we wouldn't use anymore, but back then, she was my favorite author. And for me, as a child, and I'm very grateful to my parents to have introduced me to the world of storytelling when I was very young, with goodnight stories as long as I can think back. So this world of immersing yourself in a story and going on big, massive adventures in your head, that's something I wanted to do. I wanted to be like that person I couldn't grasp back then, who makes all these adventures. That's what I wanted to do. And it sort of informed my life because I studied in Sweden. I got a scholarship for Gothenburg University through my studies. Originally, I was not focused on Sweden, but that just happened. And I loved it. I loved every bit of it, particularly because Astrid Lindgren is Swedish. So I actually got to meet her as well. And but then, of course, knowing now that the ADD in me was shying away from focusing on that path and actually really going down that road and saying, I want to be an author myself. But it's not too late. I finished my first children's book. So the whole ghostwriting and coaching is, of course, my profession. But I'm now closer to that dream of that 7-year-old than I've ever been. I'm in negotiations with one of the big 5 publishers for that book. Don't know if anything comes out of that, but it's more than just sending in the proposal. I'm actually talking to real life people in there in the background. And I've written 2 more books that I would like to self-publish, just because I'm really intrigued by that possibility to do everything from writing your book, putting it out there under your own terms, and then promoting it. It's just, I want to try it with those 2 books. So that part of me, and that's the main reason why I quit my corporate job in the first place, to have time for my real dream, which is I want to be Astrid Lindgren. I want to write these stories that kids take and love and say, can I have more of it? And for Christmas this year, I've written mini books, small books for each of my 5, well, not step-grandchildren, my husband's grandchildren, for them to enjoy based on stories they wanted to hear. So they could tell me what kind of story they would like to have, from the gymnast fantasy adventure to a gymnast on a cruise ship to a time travel adventure. And I've spent any free minute I had on crafting these stories. And yesterday I sent out the order from the printer to get them printed and have them ready for Christmas.
Wonderful. And on behalf of all the people that you've helped to create their dream of telling their story, to you creating these wonderful books that are, I have no doubt, going to be really, really successful and published, and you'll fulfill your dream. But even more than that, thank you for sharing your story with me today. It's been just fascinating, is probably doesn't cover it, but also I hope really, really helpful for everybody who watches it. And I hope it's been okay for you, because we were both very nervous. I hope it's been not as bad as we thought it was going to be, hopefully.
Yes.
So we're over our nerves and we've been through it. So thank you very much. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to share all of your wisdom and experience, and just, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Fantastic.